Quite an exciting feeling having you join us today on the program The Law Gallery, coming to you from the Lagos studios of KAFTAN Television. Khalid, Bada is my name. Now, the Chinese criminal law is strict with the death penalty applied to many crimes. The 1979 Penal Code provides for 74 capital offenses and is still in force. The 1997 Penal Code provides for 68 death penalties, including 24 violent and 44 non-violent crimes. The 2011 amendment retained the death penalty but reduced the number of capital offenses by 13. Now, the 2015 amendment reduced the death penalty from 9 more crimes, bringing the number of crimes currently punishable by the death penalty to 46, of which 24 are violent and 22 are non-violent. Although the number of crimes carrying the death penalty has declined, certain crimes, including crime bunkery, are currently executed, which has significantly impacted the number of death penalties and execution. However, the major arguments against the death penalty focus on its inhumaneness, lack of deterrent effects, continuing racial and economic biases, and irreversibility. All right, so we'll go on a short break now to return with a discussion with Mr. Ogechi Mgbaka, a legal practitioner who will be shedding more light on this topic of focus. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining us once again on the Law Gallery, coming to you from the Lagos studios of KAFTAN Television. And as you know, today we have quite an interesting topic to discuss. We understand the fact that it is a common occurrence in China that the death sentences are usually meted out to corrupt politicians for cases ranging from perhaps embezzlement of public funds or acceptance of bribe. So today we are joined by a legal personnel, a legal practitioner in person of Mr. Ogechi Mgbaka. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Yes. Now we'll be discussing the death sentence in China. We're comparing with Nigeria, the legal standing in Nigeria, how reasonable that is, and perhaps if it's something we should, practice in Nigeria. Now, we understand that every country has a different definition of corruption. For some, it is perhaps just bribery. For some, it is the use of hard drug, the trafficking of drugs and all. So now, from the Nigerian perspective, from the Nigerian definition of corruption, what is your opinion about that? I would like to know that first.
Okay, thank you for having me here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
As we all already are aware, corruption is a big challenge in Nigeria. And it ranges from the high level to the low level, even on the streets, even at home, we experience corruption. So corruption is any form of inducement to calling for a favor, or it can also include doing an act which is illegal, where someone has an official duty to perform and he refuses to perform his official duty. That is also corruption. And where somebody, a public official, for example, takes funds that is meant for the good and betterment of the community and appropriates them for personal gain or for gain of persons, family members, or close by, or friends or colleagues, that is corruption. So corruption has a wide range. It's operates in different angles, in different facets, and it's wide, and it's a challenge we are currently facing in Nigeria.
Now, as a Nigerian, the death penalty being practiced in China, how do you actually think it is reasonable? Do you think it is acceptable as a Nigerian?
Yes, the question of reasonableness on this subject particularly, I do not think that there should be any generally accepted regard as to what is reasonable in this instance. We would like to look at the countries independently. Now, when you look at China, for example, you ask, is it reasonable? To them, to a large number of Chinese citizens, they may consider it as reasonable because for a long time now, throughout the long history of China, recently there have been a reprieve with respect to corruption, with these penalties being meted on corrupt political office holders. So there's been a reduction somewhat. So to them, they will consider it as reasonable. But looking at it in the Nigerian perspective, one will not be hasty to conclude that it is reasonable. And also looking at it on the international scale, the death penalty in China has largely become a topic of international discourse.
Yes, always.
A lot of persons are calling for abolition of death penalty, right? So the international community, to a large consideration, they do not see it as reasonable. In fact, capital punishment, largely, there is a move, there is a call to eradicate, to take away capital punishments in the criminal law system of countries. And a lot of countries are beginning to adopt that stand to take away capital punishment. As is commonly known, capital punishment applies to capital offenses, violent offenses. But in the case of China, it is extended beyond violent offenses to include corrupt offenses. So people feel if there is a call to eradicate death penalty in violent offenses, they believe it is more reasonable if that is also applied to non-violent offenses, including corruption. So issue of reasonableness depends. One can almost not say with any degree of certainty that it is reasonable. It depends on which angle you are coming from when you are looking at it and what system you are operating at.
But isn't it extreme? Just looking at just, okay, a person has been charged for bribery. Bribery, for an example, perhaps a police officer accepted bribe on the highway, and God be it, there is an evidence.
Yes.
And such person is given a death penalty, or perhaps a person who probably stole official funds. You understand? Don't you think it's extreme? What happened to maybe 50 years imprisonment or 100? You understand?
Okay. When you look at the Chinese criminal law itself, it is not all forms of corruption that attract death penalty.
Okay.
Yes. So there are degrees. If I'm not wrong, from 10,000 yuan and above attracts life imprisonment and other terms of imprisonment. Depending on the degree, it might attract a death penalty. So let's not conclude that it is all forms of corruption in China that attracts death penalty. It's not all. There are degrees for lower cases that involves lesser amount. There are degrees 10,000, 50,000 yuan downwards attracts a certain term of imprisonment and includes confiscation of property
yes,
and other forms of punishment. But it's not all cases that attract the death penalty.
And some I've heard of discussions.
Yes.
People say, for an example, someone is charged with the death penalty, that such person might be thrown into the lion's den. Yeah, it sounds funny. When I heard it too, I laughed. Then I thought, no, this can't be possible. Thrown into the lion's den. Do you have any idea of that? Is that even possible
I'm hearing that for the first time. I'm hearing that for the first time. In the Chinese legal system, and of course in different legal systems of the world, they have different means of executing the death penalty. Of course, in Nigeria, we have by hanging. And during the military era, we had execution.
The firing squad.
Yes, by the firing squad. So in China, what they have obtainable is injection, leather injection. We also have execution. The issue of throwing someone to lifestyle, I am all aware.
I guess that was just to create that fear.
Yes, I am all aware of that. But honestly speaking, in a country like China, one cannot overrule the possibility of that happening. You know?
Yeah, so while you were talking, you made mention of the fact that there is an argument for the abolition of the death penalty being used in
Yes.
the Chinese legal system. Do you actually think it could be abolished? Do you think perhaps the international community does the international community has an influence on the legal system, the legal practice of a country? Taking for an example, let's say the use of firing squad in Nigeria, just an analogy. Using of firing squad in Nigeria, does the international community have any influence at all? Can they say, okay, this is wrong, use something else? Is that possible?
Yeah, influence, yes, but to what degree? It is largely persuasive, right? Every country is a sovereign, has the power to make laws that guides its government and its citizens. So there are international conventions, and countries, being members of international organizations, have the liberty to ratify any of those conventions or not. They can even have right of reservation as to, we do not accept this part, we accept this part. So the international community, of course, has influence, but it is largely persuasive. Countries cannot be coerced to accept any proposal from an international organization. If you may have heard people say that the UN is a dog that barks and does not bite. So the import is, this international organization, of course, they have influence, but the influence is limited. It's largely persuasive. So to a large extent, they can influence countries. And of course, it's happening. About 180 countries already adopted the abolition of capital punishment, death penalty for criminal offenders. And the number is growing. So there is been an awareness. This is largely bordered on human rights, the right to life, and even criminals have right to life. You know?
Yes, yes.
So on that basis, they have influence, but limited though. Yes.
Now, on a broader space, how do you think this implementation of death penalty, how do you think it actually perhaps improved or retrogressed the Chinese political system? Do you actually think, okay, it has been effective?
Yeah, one can say it has. You know, the system of government in China, communism, is different from what we practice in this side of the world. So the country is led, is a single party state, and the Communist Party is the government of the day. Since the current president, Xi Jinping, became the president in 2012, the execution of offenders, corrupt politicians have increased.
Yes.
So some will say yes, because there have been a reduction in the amount of crime being perpetrated by these public office holders. Some will say no, that the president is using it as a witch hunt to, you know, take away, attack people that he considers as opposition, because from being made aware on the news that he might be gunning for a third term. So he want to, you know, take away every opposition. So on either side you look at it, people have opinions, you know, but the fact is, since he came into power, in fact, there was an instance that was late last year. The justice minister, like we have the minister for justice here in Nigeria, the justice minister of China, was found guilty of corruption and was sentenced
to a death penalty.
So that we can see that, looking at it from the Nigerian lens, we can see that as progress, because I cannot fathom that happening in Nigeria as it currently is. So looking at it from that angle, one can say that yes, there's progress, because it defies both the highly placed and the lowly placed. So notwithstanding your status in the social space, everyone, once found guilty, is sentenced accordingly.
Do you actually see it playing out in Nigeria now? China makes use of the communism. We make use of the presidential system of government. Do you think it's possible? Do you think the legislature would even allow such?
As it stands now, we have capital punishment and just they have death penalty as punishment for some offenses, murder, armed robbery, and the others. The Nigerian prison currently as it is congested. And as at last year, December, the number of prisoners on death row were more than 3,000, right? So there have been persons that have been sentenced to death by hanging, but they've been in prison. You know, governors are reluctant in signing death warrants. The system in Nigeria is almost untrustworthy. We see it in instances of the innocent being found guilty. The system does not guarantee justice. So you see instances where someone will be sentenced to death and the governor signs the death warrant and the person is executed, only to find out after the person is dead that this person was actually innocent. So those are some of the restrictions that the governors, place on themselves. Please, let's not move too fast. The system as it is now, we have a lot of work to do. But to be very candid with you, abolition of capital offenses in Nigeria would be a really good way to go, right? Because as one scholar said, a system that cannot guarantee justice should not take life. So if the judicial system in Nigeria cannot guarantee justice, adequate justice delivery, it should not be allowed to take life, because you cannot guarantee that the person you are executing is actually guilty of the offense he was accused of. That's the challenge, the position.
Now, looking at the Nigeria legal system,
yes,
do you think we have something we need to improve on? I want us to, digress into the Nigerian legal system, the charging to court and all. Do you think there's something we need to actually improve on?
We have a lot to improve on.
Can we have some of them?
A lot.
I've actually been quite interested in that discussion.
Of course, the Constitution guarantees freedoms and rights of citizens in Chapter 4 of the Constitution. But we see on a daily basis violation of these rights, and largely in the aspect of crimes. We see instances of police brutality. For instance, the Constitution says that when you arrest someone, the person should be charged to court within 24 hours. That is where a court is within proximity. But where it is not, you have 48 hours to take the person to court. But we have many instances in Nigeria where people were unlawfully arrested, not just unlawfully arrested, they were detained, they are inhumanly treated, subjected to torture and all those things. And they are left there, a lot of them for years, in detention. In fact, was it not one of the aftermaths of the NSAS protests? We're seeing cases of persons who were brutally manhandled, assaulted by the police, and some were locked up for years. The family members could not trace them, they don't know where they are. These persons were in detention. We really have a lot to deal with, so this is where to start. The problem largely is the corruption of our leaders. So when we think of it this way, some of us would like to adopt the Chinese procedure, but again, that will be difficult to apply in Nigeria because, of course, the persons that are supposed to implement these laws are the ones perpetrating the crimes themselves. So it becomes difficult, right? It becomes difficult because one will not implicate himself or, hand himself over to face the wrath of the law. A lot of persons who want to safeguard themselves and that. So we really have a long way, really, to go in Nigerian legal system.
Now, the human rights perspective of all this,
yes.
you made mention earlier that even a corrupt person has right to life.
Yes.
Looking at it from the human rights perspective, is it even ideal to met out death penalties? Only maybe in cases of someone who has committed murder. He who kills shall also be killed.
Yes.
But for other situations, is it actually ideal to met out death penalties? No, just from the human rights perspective.
In my humble opinion, it is not. And of course, that is the general view by persons and of course the international community. That is majorly the reason why the abolition of capital punishment is being called for, right? So every man has a right to life, except, in fact, the Bible, of course, supports tooth for a tooth. In the Mosaic law, the person who killed should be killed. So if A has a right to life, B also has a right to life. So A should not deprive B of his right to life. If he does that, it is only reasonable that he too be deprived of his right to life. So on that basis, it is fair. But in other aspects of crime, excluding the capital offenses as we have it in Nigeria, and in this instance to include corruption, it does not sound very reasonable to sentence someone found guilty of corruption to death. However, I'll add the caveat that it depends, right? Now, there are degrees of corruption. There are levels of corruption. On the streets, we have bribery, 50 naira, 100 naira, and all those stuff. We go to the civil service departments. You want to do something, they will ask you to drop something.
Yes, yes.
You are leaving, they ask you, it is weekend, anything for the boys, and all those stuff. Those are low-level acts of corruption. But we have our political office holders up there who are embezzling millions and billions. And these are things that should have been applied in taking care of the health of the citizens. For instance, a community in Abia State which does not have a proper health system, they lack road, but someone up there is embezzling money that should have been used to cater for these needs. And the people, because of the lack of these amenities, they lose their lives, right? So in that instance, one can even say that corruption remotely has led to a loss of life of another person. So arguing on it from that perspective, one can easily justify applying the death penalty in corruption cases, especially when it has to do with embezzlement of public funds, because these are things that are meant for the betterment of the people. And where the people lack these things, the life expectancy is cut short, right? So if we have a system where people have access to basic amenities, we discover that our livelihood will improve. So where these things are absent because of the act of the corrupt officials, there's been a loss of life. So on that basis, it is reasonable that such a corrupt officer, if found guilty, is sentenced to death. I
kind of want to understand that is the perspective of China also. Before you kill the country, before you kill the people of the country, we would kill you. Do the same to you. Now, I understand the fact that the president has the right to the prerogative of mercy.
Yes.
Does it apply to persons on the death, how do I say it?
On death row.
On death row.
Well, the Constitution gives the president, and I think that extends to governors as well for state offenses, the prerogative to grant pardon. And that applies to all classes of offenses. We see instances, now for example, terrorism. That is a capital offense. But we've seen instances in the recent years where persons who were caught as terrorists have been granted pardon. So that's, one can argue that that is even an abuse of power, because largely those persons were not even subjected to the normal trial procedure. You know, they were arrested of course, the evidence abound that these persons are terrorists, right? So the president have that prerogative. The constitution grants him that power. But then one would caution that the power should be exercised sparingly and meant to apply to more minor offenses and less apply to more serious and capital offenses. Yes.
Now, what do you think, what can we learn from the whole Chinese death penalty system? What do you think Nigeria can learn from it? Can we actually pick something out that we can apply, or should we just jettison the whole idea?
Like I said earlier, Nigeria has a long way to go. If we choose to adopt the Chinese procedure, as it is currently, Nigerian political space is currently constituted, it will not work. Yes, it will not work. We have too many corrupt persons up there. Even down here, we have too many corrupt persons. I'll give you an instance. Some days ago, I went to a government department for something, and I couldn't get what I was looking for, except you are asked to wet the palms of some certain persons. You know, so we see these things manifesting in different degrees, and they can easily justify it. They will tell you, if someone up there is collecting billions, so is it me that is collecting 30 naira that you want to come and, you know? And I think I read somewhere of an instance where there was bad road. The road was bad, so people were passing through the community to get to their destination. So the boys in the area were now collecting, what did they call it in Yoruba again? Collecting money from commuters for them to pass through the community. And one of the passengers stood up to the young men, and interestingly, others supported the young men, and their defense was, you can't ask him not to collect money. The people who are supposed to use money to prepare road, they did not repair the road. They left the road like that, and they are embezzling money. So if he's asking for 500 naira or 100 naira for you to pass through his community, he's justified. You know, truth is, you cannot justify wrong with another wrong. You know, illegality does not make another illegality to be right. Illegality is illegality, right? So if Nigeria should adopt that Chinese procedure, I am very certain it will not work as it is currently constituted. We need a leader, and of course leaders, that will be bold enough, of course they are not guilty themselves of corruption, and will be bold enough to, you know, root out these corrupt politicians from office. Except that is done, we'll just be dancing to the gallery.
Yes. What do you think could be the negative effects of this system in China? What could be the negative effects? Negative.
Well, I would like to...
Every good thing has a bad side.
Yes, of course. Every good thing has a bad side. As it stands now, one can almost not say if it is altogether positive or altogether negative. Now, the negative side, as I see it, is there is, of course, the legal system, the judicial system in China, as it currently stands, there are instances of abuse of human rights, right? The trials are largely secretive, right? And in these instances, the possibility of violation of the rights of the accused cannot be overruled. There are possibilities of that happening because of the secrecy, you know, embedded in the system. So that is a negative aspect to it. Instances of violation of the rights of the persons who are accused of corruption, because of course, like I said earlier, in the Nigerian constitution, and of course in constitution of most countries of the world, a person who commits an offense is presumed guilty, is presumed innocent until he is found guilty by a court of law through due process. Now the question is there due process? If there is no due process, when you arrive at a decision, that decision cannot be said to have emanated through a process of law. The decision can be overturned on that basis. So the cases of instances of violation of the right of accused persons cannot be taken out of the question. So on that basis, that is a negative aspect to what is happening currently in China. Yes.
It's been bothering me since. Does this death sentence, does it apply just to the Chinese citizens or perhaps even immigrants?
Now, every country has laws, criminal laws, and binds both citizens and immigrants. Immigrants in this sense, persons that are resident in the country. If you are resident in the country, you are bound by the laws of that country. So if a Chinese comes to Nigeria and commits an offense in Nigeria, that is an offense by Nigerian law, he will be subjected to the Nigerian criminal justice system, and if found guilty, will be sentenced accordingly, right? So whether you are Chinese or not, resident in China, and you commit an offense that is against the Chinese law, you will be subjected to the Chinese judicial system. Yes.
However, we've seen cases of a person committing an offense in Nigeria, perhaps an international resident living in Nigeria, and such a person is extradited to their country. When does it actually apply, the extradition
Yes,
thing?
there is an international convention that guides interrelationship of countries in respect to criminal offenses. For example, if a Nigerian resident in Nigeria commits an offense against a citizen of the U.S., that Nigerian citizen can be extradited to the US for trial, right? And these relationships are guided by international relations. So where there are agreements on extradition between countries, it is very easy for these things to happen. So you committing an offense against the United States, and you are staying in Nigeria and you hope that you will escape, nah, it will not happen. You can be extradited to the US to face trial. And we have the instance of Hush Puppy in Nigeria who committed...
the recent boys that...
yes, against the minor.
Yes, the minor
so
in the US.
These are instances. So that you are not a citizen of that country and you commit an offense does not preclude you from facing the consequences.
But is there a possibility of such person being retained in his or her country without being extradited?
Like I said, there are agreements. If both countries have extradition agreement, it can easily be, the person can easily be extradited. However, where there is absence of the agreement, and of course this person has committed offense, there are international conventions as well, though not an agreement between, bilateral agreement between the parties, but a convention of which that country is a signatory to. The person can as well be extradited.
Now, who pushes the extradition motive? Is it the resident country or the country
The country offended will most likely be the one to push for extradition, right? Because you want to punish someone who has committed offense against the state. So the person, the country that offense has not been committed against will largely not bother itself, right?
But some would consider it to be a case of distrust. Like the country doesn't trust the legal system of the other country.
Of course, that is largely the case when it comes to Nigeria. Yes, I would say that that is largely the case in Nigeria, sadly, though. When Nigerian citizens commit offense against other states, one, it is okay if the persons are tried in Nigeria and then face the consequences. That is if we have the right things in place to attend to that, but unfortunately we do not. So a country like US will not allow such a person to be subjected to the Nigerian judicial system because they are very sure the person will most likely escape. right, because of the challenge we have with our judicial system. But where that is not the case, it shouldn't be a case of distrust. It will be rather a case of mutual understanding between the states. But as it happens in Nigeria, largely in most instances, it is on this issue of distrust because they do not trust our judicial system to deliver justice.
And you think
Yes.
that was what also played out with the recent case of Senator Ikwe Kerimadu?
Okay, now the case of Ike Kuramado is slightly different.
Okay.
Right? The offense itself happened
In the
the
United
UK.
Kingdom.
Yes. And they have this law that, of course, you can donate body parts, but it should not be monetary. Right?
Yes,
And
yes.
the person should not be coerced. The person that is donating has to do it voluntarily, and the person needs to understand what he's doing. If I'm donating my blood, I should know that I'm donating blood to this individual. And I'm doing that of my own free will, volition. I am not doing that with the intention of getting a reward, or I'm not doing that because I was coerced to. So that was what happened in the case of Ekremado. The daughter is there in the UK hospital, and they brought the young man to UK to donate his kidney for the daughter. So that was an offense that happened in UK, and they have the law that guides against that. So,
and do you think he received a fair judgment?
Well, looking at it legally, I would say yes, right? Because the law is the law, notwithstanding your social status. I'm quite sure if that matter had been tried in Nigeria, his influence alone could have whittled down the whole process. But they have a system where the law does not respect you, no matter who you are, your social status in the society. The law is the law, and it's applicable to all and sundry. Once you are found guilty of an offense, you are meant to suffer the consequences. It is unfortunate, actually, because as it stands now, of course, the child is still there, and ideally she needs medical attention.
Of course.
Right? But the truth is, they did not go about the procedure as
the right way
prescribed by law. So legally speaking, it was fair.
So generally, what do you think Nigeria can do to improve our legal system? We understand that we have laws, and sometimes the law doesn't even apply to certain people, and even when it applies, sometimes it is not effectively applied. What do you think we can actually do? Do you think it is the problem of just the judiciary, or perhaps the legislature has something to chip in, or the executive has an impact too?
Yes, all arms of government have a role to play here. I've always argued that the problem we have in Nigeria with respect to corruption is not the absence of laws, but rather the political will to implement these laws. We have the judicial system and, of course, the executive system playing a larger role in this instance. Judicial system, the courts, and the judges, and everyone in between. And the executive, the president, the governors, the armed forces, police, and every other agency of government, they all play a role in this instance. We already have the laws. The legislation have already made the laws guiding these activities. So it is now left on the executive to implement these laws, and of course for the judiciary to apply the law in appropriate situations. So what we lack is not the absence of laws, but the political will to implement these laws. And again, influence of politicians, right, hamper the effective administration of these laws. You see someone who is arrested for having committed an offense. He calls his uncle, who is somewhere up there, and the uncle calls a high-ranking officer of the armed forces, whichever one, and over the phone call or at their meeting, wherever they meet, they just tell him, please release my brother, and that is it. So we have a situation where justice is being selected. In Nigeria currently, it is the poor that gets justice, and justice in this sense for people who have committed offense. And where that poor person is the one who has suffered the injustice, the person does not get justice, right? We see people of influence, throwing their influence, and cases are whittled down on that basis. So, like I said earlier, we really have a long way to go. So we need political will to be able to fight these issues, and we need leaders who are uncorrupt themselves, and they have the will, the courage to stand up to the corrupt political leaders that we have currently occupying the different aspects of political life.
Thank you very much for your time. We'll be
pleasure.
wrapping up, but before we go, do you have a goodwill message for our viewers, the audience?
Yes. Well, we are in a fight in Nigeria, and we are beginning to see a glimpse of hope, and we are confident that this hope will not grow dim. So I encourage every one of us, low and high, to have the mindset to do what is right, do what is acceptable, what is good. Of course, we all know what is right and wrong. We have consciences. Let our consciences be our judge. If you are doing what is wrong, your conscience will tell you what you are doing is wrong, and the right thing is to retrace your step and do what is right. So let's keep up the fight against corruption, and God helping us, will overcome.
God help Nigeria. There you have it. We need to check our consciences. We need to retrace our steps. We know what is right and we know what is wrong. Let us try to be law-abiding citizens of Nigeria. Thank you very much, Mr. Ogechi. We really appreciate your time. Now, this is where we draw the curtain on the program for today. To return next week. Khalid, Bada is my name.